They always believed that confiscating my badge meant stripping away my power. They had no idea their billion-dollar empire ran on a single vein, and its heartbeat fit inside my pocket. What do you do when the fools cutting your livelihood do not realize you control the entire ocean? Pull up a chair. Let me tell you how an automated system gets unplugged, bringing down the elite and shattering their arrogance in under 2 hours. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to start by sincerely thanking you for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to continue operating here. Because of this, we will be forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform in the near future, and we are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please support us by joining our Patreon channel to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and describe detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors in the same story. You can join by scanning the QR code for our Patreon page on the screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or comments section of this video. Let us begin today's story, told through the eyes of our protagonist, Emery James. The glass-walled meeting room on the 40th floor of Zenith Freight felt less like an office and more like an execution chamber. Below us, the city of Austin baked in the afternoon sun, oblivious to the corporate slaughter about to take place above the clouds. I am 32 years old, and for the last 4 years, I was the lead engineer and system architect for this entire automated smart freight empire. I built the brain that moved thousands of tons of cargo across the country every single day, but right now, I was just a line item waiting to be erased. Sitting across from me at the massive mahogany table was our Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Vance. Sterling was a textbook tech bro, a young, arrogant man who valued the cut of his Italian suit far more than the actual mechanics of the company he ran. He was flanked by a row of expressionless corporate lawyers and 2 representatives from a major venture capital firm. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, and entirely devoid of gratitude. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers with a look of practiced sympathy that did not reach his cold eyes. "Emery, we are going to have to let you go," Sterling announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Effective immediately." He threw a thick severance packet across the polished wood. It slid to a halt just inches from my folded hands. "We are entering a massive merger in less than a week," he continued, waving a hand dismissively. "The board is demanding rigorous cost optimization. Let us be brutally honest here. The navigation algorithms you designed are fantastic, but they are fully automated now. The system runs itself. Zenith simply does not need to keep paying the exorbitant salary of a chief architect when the house is already built. We need maintenance workers, not expensive dreamers." I sat perfectly still. I did not fight back. I did not shed a single tear, nor did I waste my breath trying to explain the sheer magnitude of his ignorance. My silence seemed to unnerve the venture capitalists, who shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats, but Sterling just smirked, mistaking my quietness for defeat. I thought my power lived in the title printed on my office door. He thought an algorithm was just a piece of static machinery you could buy, plug in, and ignore, without saying a word. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, opening a heavily encrypted administrative panel disguised as a simple utility app. With a single, deliberate swipe of my thumb, I disconnected my personal cloud identifier from the Zenith master servers. The connection severed silently. No alarms blared, no sirens wailed. But deep within the digital infrastructure of the company, the heartbeat of a billion-dollar logistics network flatlined. I placed my phone back in my pocket. Then, I unclipped the plastic employee badge from my collar and set it gently on top of the severance packet. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The lawyers watched me like hawks, waiting for an outburst that would never come. I smoothed the front of my blazer and turned toward the heavy glass door. Just before I crossed the threshold, I paused. I looked back over my shoulder, meeting Sterling's arrogant gaze. A small, icy smile crept across my face. I hope you memorized how to operate the machines before firing the one who built them, I said. Sterling scoffed, rolling his eyes as he turned back to the venture capitalist to resume his presentation. I walked out, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor of the corridor. I pressed the button for the elevator and waited. The silver doors slid open. I stepped inside and turned around to face the hallway. Through the clear glass walls of the meeting room, I could see Sterling pointing a laser pen at the massive central display screen behind him. Just as the elevator doors began to close, the pristine charts on Sterling's presentation vanished. The massive screen flickered violently, plunging the room into a chaotic strobe of digital static. Then, the screen went pitch black, save for a single line of glowing red text flashing in the dead center. Core routing access lost. The doors sealed shut, cutting off the sound of Sterling shouting, leaving me with nothing but the quiet hum of the elevator taking me down to the ground floor. Exactly 15 minutes after I stepped onto the sunlit sidewalk outside the Zenith Freight Tower, the continental United States experienced a logistical heart attack. Out on Interstate 80, a convoy of 40-ton self-driving rigs suddenly engaged their emergency air brakes, grinding to a synchronized halt on the shoulder of the highway. Over in Nevada, a fleet of automated delivery drones gracefully descended like dead birds, grounding themselves in empty parking lots and suburban lawns. From the bustling ports of Los Angeles to the massive distribution hubs in New Jersey, exactly 10,000 autonomous trucks simply shut their electronic eyes and went to sleep. The entire circulatory system of the American supply chain flatlined in absolute unison. Back on the 40th floor, the initial confusion had rapidly mutated into a localized inferno of panic. Sterling Vance stood at the head of the conference table, his perfectly tailored suit now looking like a restrictive cage. He slammed his palms against the mahogany wood, shouting at his phone. He summoned Julian, the head of the Information Technology Department, demanding an immediate and total fix. "Just reboot the system," Sterling barked into the receiver, his voice echoing sharply through the glass walls. "It is just a petty parting gift from a disgruntled ex-employee trying to prove a point. Flush the cache, restart the core servers, and get those trucks moving right now." But down in the freezing server room, surrounded by endless rows of blinking server racks, Julian was staring at a digital nightmare. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, sweat dripping down his temples despite the frigid air conditioning. He was not looking at a frozen system or a stalled program. He was looking at an empty vault. "I cannot reboot it, Sterling," Julian stammered, his voice trembling audibly over the boardroom's speakerphone. "The core optimization algorithm is not crashed. It is completely gone. The entire logic framework has evaporated from the mainframe." "What do you mean, gone?" Sterling demanded, the color finally draining from his face as the venture capitalists exchanged horrified glances. "Restore it from the local cache. Do your job." "There is no cache," Julian replied, his voice pitching higher in pure terror. "Every directory linked to the navigation matrix has been wiped clean. There is only one file left in the root folder. It is a plain text document." "Read it," Sterling ordered, his breath shallow. Julian swallowed hard before reading the single line of text aloud to the entire executive board. Usage license revoked by owner. Absolute chaos erupted. The pristine boardroom instantly transformed into a war zone of ringing phones and shouting executives. Down at the massive loading docks of Long Beach, thousands of shipping containers full of perishable goods and critical manufacturing components sat dead in the water. Dispatchers screamed into their headsets, completely blind to the location of their highly expensive automated assets. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Major corporate partners, massive conglomerates that relied on Zenith Freight for just-in-time manufacturing, began calling the executive suite. They were not asking for polite updates. They were screaming obscenities and threatening immediate breach of contract lawsuits. With every passing second, the internal trading stock of the company was vaporizing. Millions of dollars were evaporating into thin air every single minute. The same venture capitalists, who had just praised Sterling a half hour ago, now watched their massive investment bleed out right before their eyes. Desperation is a powerful motivator. My phone buzzed heavily in my pocket as I sat by the window of a corner cafe, calmly sipping an iced latte. It was a frantic text message from Julian. "Emery, please, the entire network is dead. The board is going crazy and the investors are threatening to walk. I need the recovery password. Just give me the encryption key, and we can talk about getting your job back with a raise." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the cool condensation on the glass. I did not type out a reply. Instead, I opened my camera roll, selected the photograph I had taken just before leaving the meeting, and hit send. It was a crisp, high-resolution image of my termination letter. Right at the bottom, glowing in undeniable blue ink, was the flamboyant, arrogant signature of Sterling Vance. I watched the delivery receipt confirm he had read it. I put my phone face down on the table and smiled. Back in the war room, Sterling was backed into a terrifying corner. The venture capitalists were loudly threatening to pull out of the impending merger if the network was not fully operational within the hour. Fear completely overrode his limited technical understanding. He needed a band-aid. Something, anything to make the red lights turn green on the central monitor to save face. "Julian," Sterling shouted, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Load the legacy backup, the one from 3 years ago." Julian froze. "Sir, we cannot do that. Emery explicitly quarantined that version. It contains a fatal feedback loop in the spatial recognition matrix. She warned us never to deploy it in a live environment. It will cause absolute havoc on the public roads." "I do not care about her warnings," Sterling roared, slamming his fist onto the table so hard a glass of water spilled over. "I am the chief executive officer. The merger partners are breathing down my neck, and I will not lose this deal. We need moving trucks right now to show them the company is functional. I am giving you a direct, executive order. Activate the legacy system immediately." Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second before corporate compliance beat out engineering common sense. He entered the override commands, bypassing every safety protocol I had ever built. With a heavy keystroke, he deployed the corrupted ghost of a 3-year-old algorithm into the veins of a modern highway network, sealing their doom. The moment the legacy code hit the live network, the real nightmare began. It took less than 20 minutes for the outdated spatial matrix to completely degrade under the weight of modern traffic variables. Out on the highways, 40-ton machines suddenly lost their depth perception. The algorithms from 3 years ago could not process the complex sensor data of the new hardware. In downtown Seattle, an autonomous rig swerved violently to avoid a non-existent obstacle, plowing over a concrete barrier and effectively blocking a major intersection. The structural damage was massive, but the secondary effects were far worse. In Chicago, 3 delivery trucks carrying critical, temperature-controlled medical supplies lost their satellite lock. Instead of routing to the designated hospitals, they drove endlessly in geometric circles through industrial parks until their batteries drained. Doctors and nurses were left waiting for urgent surgical equipment that would never arrive. The news networks erupted with terrifying speed. Within 1 hour, Zenith Freight was no longer just a failing logistics company. It was a national hazard. Anchors on every major network were reporting live on the rogue trucks, wreaking havoc across 20 different states. Aerial footage showed traffic jams stretching for miles. Back in his office, Sterling watched the broadcast with a face drained of blood. The confident, arrogant executive from an hour ago was entirely gone. He knew the venture capitalists were packing their briefcases. He knew the merger was hanging by a microscopic thread. Panic sets in when a man realizes his golden parachute is on fire. To save his own skin, he resorted to the oldest, dirtiest trick in the corporate playbook. He decided to play the victim and shift the blame. Sterling picked up his secure line and dialed the regional director of the Federal Infrastructure Oversight Commission, heavily known in the industry as the FIOC. He did not confess to his reckless executive order. He did not admit that he had overridden safety protocols to save face. Instead, he spun a web of malicious, calculated lies. He officially filed a federal complaint against me, accusing me of cyber terrorism, corporate espionage, and the deliberate sabotage of national infrastructure. He painted himself as a heroic leader, trying to mitigate a devastating cyber attack launched by a disgruntled, unstable former employee who could not handle being let go. I wanted them to lock me up before anyone could look under the hood of his company. He had no idea that I was sitting in a quiet corner booth of a coffee shop just 3 blocks down the street, stirring a fresh cup of espresso and watching his entire frantic operation unfold on my laptop screen. My screen was completely black, illuminated only by a cascading waterfall of green text. Zenith Freight was absolutely desperate. Having realized the legacy system was a catastrophic failure, Sterling had evidently ordered his engineering team to abandon it and launch a brute force attack against my personal data vault. They were trying to break down the digital doors and steal the current algorithm back to stop the bleeding. What Sterling did not realize was that I had anticipated this exact maneuver. I had not just locked the door, I had electrified the handle. My private server was heavily fortified with a specialized honeypot protocol, a digital trap designed specifically for arrogant men who think they can take whatever they want. Every single time their servers attempted to bypass my firewall, my software silently recorded everything. Incoming connection denied. The screen flashed over and over, pulsing like a steady heartbeat. With every failed attempt, my system captured their exact internet protocol address, the precise time of the intrusion down to the millisecond, and the unique user identification of the machine launching the attack. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the logs filled up line by line. The attacks were not coming from a generic IT workstation down in the basement. They were coming directly from the master terminal in the executive suite on the 40th floor. Sterling was authorizing the hack using his own digital signature. In his blind panic to regain control, he was handing me a bulletproof dossier of his own federal cybercrimes. I let them hammer away at my firewall for another 45 minutes, sipping my espresso while I collected hundreds of pages of undeniable evidence. Then, I decided it was time to make my first real move on the chessboard. I pulled out my phone and dialed a private number I had not used in 2 years. It belonged to Marcus, a senior investigator at the FIOC who I had consulted with during the early days of drafting autonomous vehicle regulations. He was a sharp, no-nonsense federal agent who valued data over corporate spin. He answered on the third ring. "Emery," Marcus said, sounding incredibly tense. "I was just about to call you. Your former boss just filed a massive federal complaint. He is claiming you held his network hostage, stole company property, and caused the traffic disasters currently all over the news. We are preparing to issue a warrant." "Hello, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. I assumed he would try something exactly like that. "I am calling to save your department a tremendous amount of time. Sterling Vance is lying to a federal agency. The traffic collisions you are seeing on the news right now are the direct result of a 3-year-old deprecated legacy system. It is a system I explicitly banned from use due to fatal spatial recognition flaws." Marcus was quiet for a heavy moment. "He claims you deployed that flawed system as a sabotage mechanism before you walked out the door. I have a time-stamped digital log proving that the legacy override was authorized directly from the Chief Executive Officer terminal, exactly 42 minutes after I was escorted from the building," I explained calmly, leaning back in my booth. "Furthermore, I am currently watching his terminal attempt an illegal brute force intrusion into my privately owned, legally licensed server. I am sending you the encrypted logs right now. I highly suggest you look at the timestamps of his executive override." I pressed the enter key on my laptop. A compressed file containing every single piece of evidence shot through the secure channel directly to the federal investigator inbox. "Got it," Marcus said, his tone shifting instantly from suspicion to sharp professional focus. I could hear the sound of his mouse clicking as he opened the file. "Emery, if these logs authenticate, Sterling just committed perjury, filed a false federal report, and authorized corporate cyber espionage." "They will authenticate," I assured him. "Have a good afternoon, Marcus." I ended the call and gently closed my laptop. The satisfying click of the aluminum casing shutting felt like the sound of a heavy vault locking into place. Sterling thought he was tightening a noose around my neck to save his sinking ship. He had no idea. He had just walked right onto a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. I packed my bag, stepped out into the warm afternoon air, and prepared myself for the legal slaughter that I knew was about to unfold. At precisely 6 o'clock in the evening, the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the quiet hallway of my townhouse. I was sitting at my kitchen island, waiting. I walked over, unlatched the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. Standing on my porch were 3 federal agents wearing dark suits, their expressions carved from stone. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe jawline, held up a leather badge wallet in one hand and a thick stack of folded papers in the other. "We are with the Federal Infrastructure Oversight Commission," the lead agent stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "We have a federal warrant to search these premises and confiscate any electronic devices, servers, or storage media in relation to an ongoing cyber terrorism investigation. Step aside, please." Instead of displaying the panic they clearly expected, I simply smiled, pushed the door open all the way, and gestured warmly toward the interior of my home. "Come on in, gentlemen," I said smoothly. "I have been expecting you, but before you start ripping the cables out of my walls, I highly suggest you look at what I have left for you on the dining room table. It might save you a tremendous amount of paperwork." The agents exchanged a wary glance, hands resting cautiously near their utility belts as they stepped inside. I led them into the dining room. Sitting dead center on the polished oak table was not a laptop, nor a decrypted hard drive. It was a pristine, physical leather binder, thicker than a brick, alongside 3 neat stacks of notarized manila folders. The lead agent stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" "This," I replied, pulling out a chair and gesturing for him to sit, "is a complete, legally binding paper trail of my intellectual property rights. You are here because Sterling Vance swore on a federal affidavit that I stole company property and sabotaged his network, correct?" The agent did not answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. I opened the heavy leather binder and flipped to the first tab. "Let us start with the United States Patent and Trademark Office," I began, my tone shifting into a sharp, clinical register. "Here are the original, time-stamped copyright registrations for the core routing algorithm currently missing from the Zenith Freight mainframe. You will notice the sole proprietor listed is me, not Zenith, not Sterling Vance, me." I flipped to the second tab, revealing a heavily annotated employment contract. "When I was hired 4 years ago, Zenith could not afford to purchase my algorithm outright," I explained, tapping my index finger against a highlighted clause. "So, my attorneys drafted a very specific agreement. I never sold the technology to the company. I simply leased it to them. Section 4, Paragraph 9, clearly states that Zenith Freight was granted a non-transferable, personal use license that remained valid only for the duration of my active employment." The second agent leaned in, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "Are you saying this was a dead man switch?" "I am saying it is a legally sound automated asset protection protocol," I corrected him sharply. "When Sterling Vance verbally terminated my employment at 2 o'clock this afternoon, the contract stipulated that my active employment status immediately ceased. That status change automatically triggered the license revocation. The system taking itself offline was not an act of cyber terrorism or malicious sabotage. It was a perfectly legal self-defense mechanism to prevent the unauthorized, unlicensed use of my privately owned intellectual property." The lead agent picked up the contract, his eyes darting back and forth across the highlighted text. The rigid, intimidating posture he had walked in with was rapidly dissolving into profound realization. He looked at the copyright dates, then at the termination clause, and finally at the signature of the chief executive officer at the bottom of the page. "He signed this," the agent muttered, almost to himself. "Yes, he did," I replied, crossing my arms. "Which means when he called your director today and claimed I hacked his system to steal his property, he knowingly lied to a federal agency. He filed a false report to weaponize your commission against a private citizen to cover up his own catastrophic executive failure. Committing perjury on a federal affidavit is a felony, is it not?" The room fell entirely silent. The agents looked at each other. They were no longer looking at a cyber terrorist. They were looking at a woman who had just handed them a neatly wrapped, irrefutable corporate fraud case. The lead agent closed the binder, handing it back to me. "We are not confiscating your servers," he said, his voice now tight with a completely different kind of anger. "We are going to pay a visit to the 40th floor of the Zenith Tower." As the agents marched out of my house, I immediately picked up my phone and dialed David, my lead corporate attorney. It was time to drop the guillotine. "David, the feds just left," I said. "Drop the hammer." Within 10 minutes, a massive cease and desist order was electronically filed and physically couriered directly to the legal department at Zenith Freight. It was a brutal, ironclad legal strike. The document legally mandated that Zenith immediately halt any and all attempts to access, reverse engineer, or utilize any residual databases, server caches, or network architectures even remotely tied to my proprietary algorithm. If they typed a single line of code trying to rebuild my system, they would be hit with intellectual property theft charges, carrying penalties of $10,000 per violation per minute. I effectively placed a legal padlock on their entire information technology department. They were paralyzed. Across town, the reality of the situation was finally crashing down on Sterling Vance. It was approaching midnight, and his pristine glass office had become a tomb. His tie was undone, his hair disheveled, and his desk was covered in printed copies of the cease and desist order. He was completely cornered. The legacy system was destroying the supply chain. The federal government was turning its crosshairs on him for perjury, and his technical team was legally forbidden from fixing the problem. In a state of sheer, unadulterated panic, he decided to cut his losses and run. He grabbed his phone and frantically dialed the private number of the lead investor from the conglomerate planning to acquire them. "Listen to me," Sterling pleaded into the phone, his voice shaking with desperation. "We can bypass the regulatory waiting period. I want to accelerate the buyout. We sign the papers tonight. I will take a 40% cut on the overall valuation, and I will step down immediately. Just wire the funds into escrow and the company is yours." I was trying to fire sale the entire empire in the middle of the night, hoping to cash out his equity and vanish into the wind before the buyers realized they were purchasing a hollow shell. He thought he could outrun the collapse. He did not realize I had already locked the exits. At exactly 9 o'clock the following morning, the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor felt less like a center of corporate power and more like a pressurized submarine about to implode. An emergency meeting had been convened at the urgent request of the acquiring conglomerate. The air was incredibly dense, completely saturated with unspoken accusations and heavy suspicion. At one end of the massive mahogany table sat the executive board of Zenith Freight, looking as though they had not slept a single minute. At the opposite end sat the sharply dressed directors of the acquiring company, led by their senior vice president of acquisitions, a stern, unforgiving man named Richard Belmont. Sterling Vance stood at the head of the table. He had changed into a fresh suit, but the heavy bags under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his polished exterior. He was fighting for his corporate life, spinning a desperate web of absolute fiction. "I assure you, Richard, the situation is entirely contained," Sterling said, forcing a bright, confident smile that looked more like a grimace. "What you saw on the news yesterday was simply a minor routing anomaly caused by an aggressive, but necessary, infrastructure upgrade. We are transitioning our fleet to a more robust server architecture. The temporary delays are unfortunate, but our engineers anticipate a full system restoration before 1 o'clock this afternoon. The foundation of Zenith Freight has never been stronger." I was lying through his teeth, deliberately hiding the fact that his network was completely paralyzed, and more importantly, concealing the active federal investigation closing in around his neck. Richard Belmont did not smile back. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wood. "A minor anomaly? My logistical analysts report that exactly 10,000 of your automated trucks are completely dead in the water. Furthermore, I am hearing very troubling rumors about an intellectual property dispute involving your former chief architect. I need the absolute truth. Sterling, right now." Sterling swallowed hard. "Those rumors are completely unfounded. Just the desperate cries of a disgruntled former employee we let go for performance issues. She has zero leverage and absolutely no control over our core assets." before Sterling could finish his sentence. The heavy wooden doors of the boardroom burst open with a violent crash that echoed like a gunshot. The room froze. I walked through the doorway, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, echoing the exact rhythm of my departure the day before. But this time, I was not alone. To my right was David, my lead corporate attorney, carrying a thick leather briefcase. To my left were Marcus and the lead agent from the Federal Infrastructure Oversight Commission, both displaying their federal badges openly on their lapels. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling shouted, his voice cracking as his carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. "Security? Get her out of here immediately. This is a highly classified corporate meeting." "You can sit down and close your mouth, Mr. Vance," Richard Belmont commanded, his voice cutting through the room like a steel blade. "She is not trespassing. I invited her." Sterling stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. "You invited her?" "At exactly 4 o'clock this morning," Richard explained coldly. "My entire executive board received a highly encrypted, heavily documented dossier labeled as a severe merger risk assessment. It was sent directly by Ms. James. After reading its contents, we determined her presence was absolutely mandatory for this discussion. The floor is yours, Ms. James." I walked directly to the head of the table, stopping just inches away from where Sterling was standing. I did not look at him. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small digital tablet, and plugged it directly into the main projection console, the massive central screen. The same screen that had flashed red the day before suddenly roared to life. I projected a highly detailed, undeniable command line log in glowing white text against a black background. "Sterling Vance just stood here and told you the system is undergoing a routine upgrade," I said, my voice echoing clearly off the glass walls. "That is a lie. He also told you I have no control over the core assets. That is also a lie. Look at the screen. What you are seeing is a live, time-stamped server log from my privately owned, legally licensed data vault." I pressed a button, highlighting a massive block of red text. "Between the hours of midnight and 4 o'clock this morning," I continued, turning to face the investors, "Zenith Freight initiated exactly 3,412 illegal brute force intrusion attempts against my personal firewall. They were desperately trying to hack into my servers to steal back the routing algorithms they lost yesterday. And worse, every single one of these illegal hacking attempts was authenticated and authorized using the secure digital signature of your chief executive officer, Sterling Vance." The silence in the room was absolute, deafening, and suffocating. The venture capitalists stared at the screen in pure horror. "This is fabricated data," Sterling stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "She is lying. She is a cyber terrorist." Marcus, the federal agent, stepped forward, his presence immediately dominating the room. "The Federal Infrastructure Oversight Commission has already authenticated those logs. Mr. Vance, we have also authenticated the fact that you lied on a federal affidavit yesterday afternoon. You are currently the subject of an active criminal investigation for perjury, corporate fraud, and intellectual property theft." Sterling collapsed into his leather chair, gasping for air like a drowning man. I turned my attention entirely to Richard Belmont and his team of buyers. I delivered the final, fatal blow with absolute surgical precision. "Zenith Freight is an illusion," I stated clearly, letting every single word sink deep into their minds. "You are preparing to spend over $1 billion to acquire a smart logistics company, but as of yesterday afternoon, this company does not own a single line of smart technology. They do not own the spatial matrix. They do not own the routing protocol. They own nothing but metal, rubber, and empty warehouses. The brain that makes those trucks move belongs entirely to me. And at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the man sitting in that chair decided to throw that brain out the door to save a few dollars." I unplugged my tablet. The screen went completely black. "The billion-dollar valuation of Zenith Freight does not exist," I concluded softly. "It evaporated the second he took my badge." Richard Belmont stared at the black screen for a long, heavy moment. He then looked down at the massive 50-page merger contract sitting perfectly aligned on the table in front of him, without a single word. Belmont stood up, picked up the thick stack of legal documents, and gripped it with both hands. With a sharp, violent motion, he tore the contract completely in half. He tossed the shredded pieces of paper onto the center of the mahogany table, letting them scatter like dead leaves. "We are done here," Belmont announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. "This deal is completely dead. We are withdrawing our offer permanently, and we will be notifying the Securities and Exchange Commission about the fraudulent nature of your disclosures." Belmont and his team stood up in absolute unison, buttoning their suit jackets before walking out of the glass doors without looking back. Sterling sat completely paralyzed in his chair, staring at the torn paper on the table, finally realizing that the empire he thought he ruled had just burned to the absolute ground. As the shredded pieces of the merger contract settled on the mahogany table, the room shifted from shock to ruthless survival mode. The venture capitalists, realizing their entire investment was about to evaporate, did not hesitate for a single second. The lead investor, a woman who had remained completely silent until now, stood up and slammed her hand on the table. "I call an immediate vote of no confidence," she declared, her voice trembling with absolute fury. "All in favor of removing Sterling Vance from the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second." Every single hand from the Zenith board shot into the air. Sterling looked around wildly, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You cannot do this," he whispered, his voice completely broken. "I built this company." "You built a glass house," the investor spat back. "And then you threw a stone right through the roof. You are terminated." Sterling, the second the words left her mouth, Marcus, the federal agent, stepped forward. He reached to his belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic click echoed sharply in the silent room. "Sterling Vance," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy as he forcefully turned Sterling around and locked his wrists behind his back. "You are under arrest for federal perjury, massive financial fraud, and the attempted theft of private intellectual property. You have the right to remain silent, and considering the massive amount of evidence we have against you, I highly suggest you use it." I watched without a single ounce of pity as the golden boy of Austin Tech was escorted out of his own glass castle, his head bowed in absolute disgrace. I walked down to the ground floor lobby a few minutes later, feeling a profound sense of closure. As I approached the revolving glass doors, a voice called out to me, "Ms. James, a moment of your time, please." I turned to see Richard Belmont, standing near the reception desk. The stern, unforgiving demeanor he had displayed upstairs was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, calculated respect. "That was the most ruthless, brilliant execution of corporate leverage I have ever witnessed," Belmont said, extending his hand. "Zenith Freight is a dead company walking, but your technology is the absolute future. My conglomerate was prepared to pay over $1 billion for that shell of a business upstairs. I am officially offering you 3 times that amount right now, in cash and equity, for the exclusive, outright ownership of your routing algorithm." I looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "I appreciate the incredibly generous offer, Mr. Belmont," I replied smoothly. "But I think I have learned my lesson about handing the keys of my kingdom over to someone else. I am not selling." The fallout was historically catastrophic. In exactly 48 hours, Zenith Freight officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. With their trucks completely immobilized, they faced an avalanche of breach of contract lawsuits from every major supplier in the country. Their stock dropped to absolute zero. But from the ashes of their arrogant empire, I built something real. I took the capital I had saved over the years and formed an independent infrastructure management firm. When the bankruptcy courts ordered the immediate liquidation of Zenith assets, I stepped in and bought their massive distribution warehouses and their entire fleet of autonomous trucks for absolute pennies on the dollar. I did not stop there. I personally reached out to Julian and every single hard-working, brilliant engineer who had been crushed under the toxic leadership of the former regime. I hired them all back, doubling their salaries and giving them actual equity in the new company. Today, I am standing in my own corner office, looking down at the sprawling city of Austin. Below me, the highways are flowing perfectly. Thousands of trucks are moving exactly where they need to go, precisely when they need to be there, guided by the quiet, flawless hum of my servers. They always thought power was about having your name on the building, wearing an expensive suit, and possessing the authority to take someone's badge away. They were incredibly wrong. True power is not loud. It does not need to shout in a boardroom. True power is sitting quietly in the shadows, knowing with absolute certainty that you hold the brain of the entire machine in the palm of your hand. Thank you so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story compelling, please remember that this channel has been completely demonetized by YouTube, and we are entirely out of budget. Because of this, we will absolutely not be uploading any new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning our operations entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can hear our absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and take care.